Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday, July the 8th regular board meeting for the Butte Irrigation District. Mr. Glacial, will you please give us the invitation?
I will. No. You already know my favorite parts of the Bible. James 1, 5, and 6. So if any man thinks he lacks wisdom, ask a year, and you'll give it generously, but ask in faith. Well, I often take it back. So I could use it. Maybe somebody else here could too. We thank you for an opportunity to gather together. We ask you to guide us, take care of our members' business and money. Amen.
Amen. Director Garai, will you please lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Introduction to guests.
Good morning, Ryan. Mike Riley.
You say the best, I hope the same to you.
And online?
Online today, we have Director PK Colquitt. We have AJ Carlson from EBID. We have Caitlin Owens from NMOSC. We have D. Hawkins. We have Delise Maciel from EBID. We have G. Melendez. We have James Narvice from EBID. We have Leah Diaz from EBID. We have Dr. Phil King, consultant. We have Scott Gamboa with EBID and Sky DeVore. Just entering is Anthony Collin.
Thank you very much, Ms. Crawford. Next item on the agenda is public input. Mr. Front.
Yeah, just a couple things. Thank you for the opportunity. First, I just wanted to compliment the staff. So through our cooperative agreement and funding agreement that we have initiated with you all, the work crews that are working on the dams and the drains are making tremendous progress. And compliments to the staff here in the office, Joe and Mia. We just got our second quarter report from them. And it's very good. There's a lot of work that goes into that. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. Just thank you to them. I'm very happy with the progress there. The second thing is Director Sloan was recently featured in a story through our planning group. And that's been published on the Mainstream New Mexico website. So when you get a chance, please take a look at that and we'll work with Ms. Crawford to get that on your website as well. I think it's titled Farming Through the Worst Drought for 100 Years. So great story, good pictures.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. Is there any further public comment? Anybody online? Moving on. Without opposition, does anybody have any opposition to the way the agenda is presented? Without opposition, the agenda is approved. Next item on the agenda is approval of board minutes. Any corrections? Mr. President, I move to approve the minutes of June 10th, 2026. I have a motion on the floor to approve the June 10th board meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by, motion by Director Davier, second by Director Garai. Any discussion? With that discussion is closed, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those please say no. The opinion of the president, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the Water Resources Committee report. Director Garai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last time the Water Resource Committee convened was May 29th. At that meeting, we discussed the initial release and the bundles. Since then, we have not had a board meeting because we had our water season. Everybody was busy and tied up. However, we did start a rough draft on a policy for the bundles. I believe it hasn't been reviewed by staff or many others yet, but we hope to have that in place by the next board meeting. Everybody's just been really busy with water season. And I just want to comment on the way they delivered it. Everything went very smooth and efficient. Proud of what they did. They didn't have water running for 6 hours with nobody taking it. Kudos to all you guys, the ditch riders, everybody, went real smooth. My phone only rang a couple of times and my normal phone. Anyways, moving on, Dr. King, has sent us the Water Resource Committee report, which I'll just touch, lightly on it because it's gonna be in his, report. Season has come to an end, they're gonna give us an update on the 2026 season end. They don't have all the numbers in place yet for the final charges. Hopefully Mexico and EP number 1 June charges will be coming in the next days. He has a snapshot of it here, but he has it on his presentation, so I'll let him touch base on that when he gives his. Other than that, he has in there the diversion ratios, what it was all about. Initial release was May 29th. Array shut down June 30th, and July 2nd was over here on the west side. But other than that, Dr. King will bring us up to date on everything, where we're at with the lake. So with that, I'll let Dr. King finish it in his report.
Thank you, Director Gray. Next item on the agenda is the Government Affairs Committee report. Ms. DeVore.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Give us just a second. Let me turn the volume up.
Is that better?
Let's see. Yes. Okay, we can proceed.
Okay. Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Since the June board meeting, the committee's immediate focus has been on ICIP and funding follow-up. All of our materials were filed, the resolution was received by DFA, and we are well positioned to continue updating those and apply for water project fund and water trust board funding. We've also noted that July 1 marked the start of the new state fiscal year, so we are going to be working on the capital outlay that we received last year. Another focus has been interim committee engagement. We are working with Water and Natural Resources Committee on a presentation, and the next meeting is in Roswell in 2 weeks, and I will be attending on behalf of the board and report back so we can continue to engage. We're also planning a legislative tour in September with a very targeted group of legislators so that they can see our work and really understand our funding goals and water strategy. So I will keep everyone posted on that. We also discussed federal and regional water advocacy, particularly regarding sediment removal funding. And the agreed approach is to meet with IBWC and the Compact Commission before we move forward. So Mr. Smith is planning that. And our new big project that we're working on this month is legislative position statements. In our July 15th committee meeting, we hope to have our first draft of those. And every member of the committee has been asked to bring a few bullet points surrounding where they think that that should live. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. DeVore? Mr. Smith, would you like to give us a brief update on where we stand with the IBWC?
Yes, so I believe I mentioned at the last board meeting, I've been contacted by the Compact Commissioner for Texas, Bobby Scove, asking about our priorities for the IBWC. We have provided him with a list of our top priorities within the river channel where we'd like them to do the work. I've also been contacted by Hector Gonzalez from El Paso Water, not number 1, but El Paso Water. He's their lobbyist. They have apparently been working for multiple years trying to obtain funding in order for the IBWC construction unit to be able to do that work. I received that email yesterday, so we're going to coordinate with them on some of their efforts to reach our federal delegation to help support funding the IBWC to actually do this work. We're still awaiting a meeting with the deputy commissioner and the Rio Grande Compact Commission. But IBWC staff has already reached out about the priorities that we submitted. And hopefully some of that work will begin fairly quickly. So we're looking to support the EV water effort. And we'll talk about that in my report, but I mean, I haven't mentioned it now. Hector is planning to be in DC July 19th through the 23rd to meet with the House Appropriations Committee, if I'm not mistaken. He asked for potential support from EBID. That is very short notice and very short timing, but we want to send President Roby Rosa to DC. That's entirely up to him. And that's basically where we are as far as the IBWC is concerned.
President. I mentioned Hector about the subject, and he said if possible, it'd be nice to have a board member go. If not, you recommended that we at least send Chris Colley so we have a face to represent us. So I will leave that to the discretion of the board. I guess he works pretty closely with Chris Colley on other things.
Can we discuss what we want our strategy to be there at this point?
So I believe it's appropriate to discuss the things that are brought up in the government affairs report, Mr. President. I don't know if there's an action being requested. That would be different.
We can't take action.
Mr. President, I want to state my appreciation for IBWC showing a meeting last month. I appreciate other entities and agencies in our region reaching out to coordinate with us. Those that don't know, IBWC is part of the State Department, and certainly our reach of the river is not a high priority for the State Department of the United States. I understand that, but it's a high priority for us, and they're the agency we need to work with, and I appreciate any opportunity we have to work together. We're going to have a presentation a little bit later on the work that our state Interstate Stream Commission has done with EBID and the progress that they've made in the areas that they can work cooperatively. You need to match the funds up with the skills and ability to accomplish the work, the ability to identify where priorities need to be. And I think there's some good opportunities for us, our sister district, and other entities that depend on the river, which is pretty much everyone in the region, work with IBWC to get this stuff accomplished. I certainly support Director Roby Rosa going to Washington, DC. Or another board member if there's a board member that wants to manage that. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Director Doggy.
Yes, sure. Josh, maybe this is premature, but could I ask if any of those projects specifically deal with Selden Canyon?
Selden Canyon, so they're all basically within the. Did we list? We didn't list Selden Canyon.
We did.
Oh, do we?
I actually had this with the state land yesterday, and I know you guys are gonna be working on some land transfers right there at that dam. So I talked with them and we're willing to help out with that situation, but we will be doing some, gotta be careful, maintenance of that dam, not rehabilitation. So I'll get with you and we can touch base on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
So really, we have a few different ways that we can work with IBWC to get them to be the sediment out of the river. One is working directly with them. That's often the best way to deal with government agencies, but when they don't have the funding, then how do we help them get there? And we can either, it could either be the funding or the will. And if the problem's the will, then I think strongly worded letters from our federal legislators could be effective. If it's not just will and it's actually funding, then the way that we have to do it is by getting the money. They can ask for money all they want. That doesn't mean that the appropriators are going to appreciate their concerns and give them. So. It falls on us to go to our delegation. To convince our delegation that it is a worthwhile appropriation to give them the money to clean out the sediment. And if that's what we want our strategy to be, then we need to put the legwork in, actually go meet with the federal delegation. Tell them that we want them to include this in a funding bill. Director Bishop.
Mr. President, apparently IBWC is getting a really large increase in funding this year. They have problems to spend it on too. But Mr. Gonzalez's approach is, he wants to earmark 55 million for sediment removal in the Rio Grande. He says, if we don't get an earmark, it'll go elsewhere. It's already passed the House, so he's trying to push it through the Senate. And then of course they got reconciled between the two houses. But I think we need to at least write a letter supporting his position, send somebody if possible, and then also prevail on our federal legislators to support this, make them aware we have a problem, and see if they will support this. Ben Ray Mohan's always been very helpful and stuff like that. Heinrich's always not known, but I get something out of him too. But anyway, that's where I think our approach needs to be.
Thank you, Director Glacial. I think a letter is well within the current direction of the board. So if you want to write a letter, Mr. Smith, please proceed. As far as travel to DC goes, that is not on the agenda. How would we deal with that?
Retroactive.
Any further questions for the Government Affairs Committee or Ms. Cole?
I have a question.
Mr. Quaid.
Mr. President, your name's getting mentioned here. Do you have time to go to Washington DC? That's a big question.
Yeah, well, we can decide that later. Any further questions? Next item on the agenda is the Water Resource Report, Dr. P. Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Okay, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, that was a wild and interesting water season, and it's still not over, of course. El Paso and Mexico are still on. Hang on, I'm having a hard time finding my controls. Here we are. I wanted to take a look upriver first here. These are all the gauges from the Colorado state line down to El Paso Narrows. And that's a lot of gauges, but it doesn't look like it on this chart because most of them are dry or nearly dry. Going down from Colorado, the Lobatos is the gauge, the compact gauge, just inside Colorado. And it's buried down here at 10 CFS right now. That's the lowest I ever recall it being in my time here. I haven't gone back and looked at it at the historicals, but certainly never seen it this low. Then at Embudo, which is on the main stem of the Rio Grande, just above Rio Chama, we've got 148 CFS. So we're accumulating 138 CFS roughly between the Colorado state line and Embudo. Otoe picks up the flow coming out of Rio Chama. So that's at 290. And the release from Cochiti very closely follows the Embudo. By the time we get down to Alameda in northern Albuquerque, we've got 4 CFS, then 0 and 0 through Paseo del Norte and the Albuquerque gauge down there by Central Avenue. Bosque Farms has 14 CFS. That's so far the I believe that's got some flow coming out of the MRGCD system to support a little bit of habitat. We've got Highway 386, which is essentially dry. San Acacia is essentially dry. Escondido, and the San Marcial floodway are both totally dry. San Marcial Conveyance Channel, you'll recall that that's the sort of desperation measure to get water into Elephant Butte Reservoir, is at 15 CFS and 13 CFS at the Elephant Butte Narrows, 3 CFS at the Elephant Butte Narrows. So they're all buried in this in this pile of zero or near zero flows down here. So that's one dry river. It's the driest I ever recall seeing it, and I've been here since 1990. Looking at our current supply as of June 6th, and of course this is changing rapidly because we've got essentially zero inflow, and we're releasing about 1,000 CFS from Caballo. So we would be losing 2,000 acre feet per day in storage. We've got 60,000 in Elephant Butte, 22,000 in Caballo, for a total of 82,000 in project storage. 5,400 of that is Colorado compact credit, and that will be held constant throughout the year. And this is an old number on Rio San Juan Chama, but it's kind of difficult for me to get a current number on that. It was at 3820 last I knew. So we've got total usable project storage, which is defined as total storage minus compact credit and San Juan Chama, not releasable water, 73,000. So including that not releasable water, plus allowances for evaporation and minimum pools in both reservoirs, we are sitting at 22,780 that we can't release. So 175 or so remaining that we can release. A seasonal supply then of 225,000. And this has gone down by just under 1,000 acre feet, maybe 900 acre feet since last month's report. Last month's report, it was at 25.7, I believe, 225.7. So we've lost about 900 of total usable seasonal supply, which, that's over a month. So the net inflow is close to zero, apparently slightly negative at this point. This is what the season looks like so far. And while EBID, as I mentioned, EBID season has concluded, but these are what happened. May 29th, we had the initial release. We picked up at Array East Side and West Side on June 1st and Leesburg on June 2nd. We ran our season, then on June 30th, Array and Leesburg ceased. On July 1st, EBID put in its order for zero diversion and shut down the east side. On July 2nd, EBID's west side diversions shut down. So basically on July 2nd, we were done with diversions. Looking forward then, Mexico will shut down on July 21st. That is what they have entered, what they've submitted as their schedule. So far as we know at this point, that is a hard and fast number. And July 31st, we're looking at shutting Caballo. An estimate of the total release for the season is about 221,000 acre feet. So notice up here we had a net seasonal supply of about 225. We're expecting to come in at about 221, so we are right on the edge of using that available release. We don't have, as Director Garay mentioned, we don't have final numbers for EBID's release or for the month of June charges, but we did do an audit as of 6/15, June 15th, to see where we stood. At that point, EBID had diverted 34,675. EP1 was at 15,400. Mexico was about 2,100. At that point, we had released about 94,000, 95,000, call it, which gives a diversion ratio, calculated diversion ratio of 0.55. Now, recall that the diversion ratio is the total charges divided by the total release. And in this release, we have to fill up the river channel, and that's about 10,000 acre feet, más o menos, of storage. Fill up the river channel from Caballo all the way down to American Dam. And we have very high initial losses, just like any infiltration function. It starts out very high and then sort of slows down to a steady state as you get further on into it. So that this is filling the channel, which is zero diversion ratio because you're filling it up. You'll make it up at the end of the season, but at this point in the season, it's all still there in storage. So diversion ratio of 0.55. As we have done forecasting out to the end of the season, that's EBID working with EP1 to look at how the season's going to wind down. We are pretty close to on target for the diversion ratio that we allocated water with, which was 0.7. And it may come out a little high, a little low, but that still looks like, if I had to pick a number right now on July 8th, I would probably still go with 0.7. So we're doing reasonably well. Things are looking good. No sense of panic, although I will say, just watching to make sure we stay within budget and all that. In one of our ops meetings earlier this week, we agreed that it was more difficult to run a 1-month season or a 2-month release season than it is to run a 6-month release season, just because everything is so tight, so much pressure.
Before you leave that slide, I got a couple questions, things that I'm regularly asked that I wanted. I said in an open meeting, what is Mexico's typical order? They've got a very consistent order.
I don't have it right in front of me, but in last month's, I gave you their release schedule, and it's set now. It's constant. It's about 100 and I have to do the
109.
conversion. It's like 3.1 QMEX, so 113 CFS, and that will remain constant until July 21st.
And James, I hear you on the line as well. Like my recollection is their order is not only consistent throughout the season, it's fairly consistent year over year over year. Am I mistaken?
Well, what they tend to do is they order metrically. So they tend to go by full or half cubic meters per second. And 1 cubic meter per second is about 35 CFS. So for example, they might start off the season at 3 QMEX, cubic meters per second. Then they usually peak around 5. And then towards the end of the season, they'll start to step it down, maybe 3.5 to 3. Right now they're running at 3.1, but I think that's just to make it all finish out evenly at July 21st.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I get a lot of questions about diversion ratio as well. So I just want to stop something on this 615 chart. About 95,000 acre feet has come out of Caballo at that point. If the gates to Caballo closed on that day, what has occurred? Well, we spent about 4 days releasing water before anything was diverted. So That's a front-loaded amount that happens every year, about 4 days of release before anything's diverted. There would be another 2 or 3 days of diversion along the system after we
That's right.
close at Caballo. So the diversion ratio would actually go up if we closed the gates Caballo at 95,000 acre feet of release, which would be an unheard of low release. And the diversion ratio would be something above 0.55.
That's right.
I get a lot of folks asking how bad it can get. Well, there's an example of how bad it can get. If we were releasing buckets full of water out of Caballo is all that we could get out. So I just want to have emphasized that for the record as well. Appreciate it, Dr. King, Mr. President.
So my question is, in
Yeah,
that regard, how does the diversion ratio compare to the upper valley diversion ratio? Because the question of how bad it can get usually has to do with the upper valley diversion ratio. And those numbers aren't the same, right?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Our diversion ratio, our instantaneous diversion ratio right now is 1.0. And that's because we're on release accounting. The diversion ratio calculated as actual diversions divided by release is somewhere down in the 70s at this point, probably low 70s. So the upper valley diversion ratio doesn't take any of the accounting effect, the release accounting. So it would be lower. I will do a UVDR calculation when we get to the end. It's kind of a messy thing to do because we have to have Texas charges in there as well. And actually, that is an annual, the Texas Mesilla portion of the groundwater down there. That is an annual thing that I will estimate at the end of the year. Or at the end of the release season here, but I'll have a number for you actually by our next meeting for what the UVDR will look like this year. It will be lower than the one we use for accounting.
Mr. President, I do want to point out the UVDR is a little wonky in that, let's say the Caballo release was as low as, I don't know, 30,000 acre feet. The UVDR would be very close to 1. Because pumping in Texas gets counted as a delivery. So if we release 30,000 acre feet, diverted none of it.
It'd be greater than 1.
And so the pumping goes on year round. And so there can be some tail wagging the dog there.
Yeah, it's a strange statistic. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. One thing that you're going to be hearing, I'm sure, from constituents and folks up in TRC about this is we wind up in a very bad place here. Elephant Butte is already below where it was. Oh no, it's not quite yet below where it was in October of 2018. But what we're going to see is lower reservoir storage than we have seen in a long, long time. This is also among the worst years for a release. These are the annual releases ranked by, from worst going up. I just picked the top 11. I picked the top 11 to include 2014 in there. 168,000 back in 2013. I'm sure you all remember that. We had a 3.5-inch allotment that year. And that was bad. 1964 was the previous, then 55. And then there's this year, which is, we estimate to be about 221,000. And I put that in bold and italics because it's this year and that is preliminary. We'll see what the actual release is here end of July, beginning of August. But the reservoir storage is really going to be profoundly low too. And this is where we're kind of white knuckling the end of the year. We aren't, reclamation has discretion as to where they leave water at the end of the year. It looks like they will be at about 30,000 total storage between the two reservoirs, and they'll distribute that somehow between Elephant Butte and Kyle. I just broke it up. I know that they want to leave Caballo no less than 12,000 acre feet. So I put 13 there and the rest in Elephant Butte. That's all hypothetical, but actually this line is all hypothetical because it hasn't happened yet. But this brings us down to storage levels that we have not seen since the 50s. And, there's a lot of talk about we've got to do something. We can't run the reservoir that low. And, it's a single purpose reservoir and we're using the water for that single purpose. The only solution that I can see is to add more water. And that, of course, is an upstream issue. You saw how bad the river is upstream. That's not going to happen in the near future. What this leaves us with is we have run basically, we will leave the tank on empty at the end of this season. And so whatever we do next year is going to depend on inflow from our monsoon season going into our snow season. So that's where we leave it. This is by far the lowest I recall from the lowest we have seen combined storage in recent years was down here in 2013 where we were at 67,000 acre feet combined storage. We're going to be about half that at the end of this year. So that's what it looks like. Inflow is everything for next year. So let's segue into looking at what inflow for next year may shape up to be.
Dr. King, before you leave that, do you recall what New Mexico's credit was in 2013? My recollection was they had one. I may be confusing it with the previous year. Anyways, it's something worth looking at. Like 2013, I believe the reason the reservoir was comparatively so high in 2013 is because it was New Mexico's water and it couldn't be released, which is exactly what you're suggesting on a remedy for low lake levels.
I'd have to go back and check, but it certainly wasn't approaching. I don't know. I don't recall off the top of my head.
It was either that year or the year before. There was a suggestion of relinquishment and it was not done. And so the water remained in the reservoir. Anyways, it's just
it's not something I have at my fingertips here. But certainly you do bring up a point though that this 17,000 that contains the 5,400 of Colorado credit, which we have to leave behind, and it contains whatever San Juan Chama water is there. Okay. Anyhow, looking forward, I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, which is look at far distant forecasts. First of all, looking at NOAA's National Weather Service predictions for July, August, and September. So this is the thick part of our monsoon season and begins now. We are forecast to have our chance for precipitation is to be above average. Doesn't say how much above average, just that there's a chance that it will be above average, basically throughout the upper watershed. And when you get down into the actual Rio Grande project area, we're bordering on equal chance. It'll either be drier than normal or wetter than normal. Definitely high on the temperature. As we go into the final quarter of the calendar year, you see that this is that El Nino effect coming in. These, by the way, are fairly old forecasts dating back to June. They were actually issued on June 18th, but this is October, November, December. We are looking at a forecast for above average precipitation throughout the Rio Grande the upper Rio Grande watershed, well, the Rio Grande watershed, and temperatures not too awfully hot, which kind of surprised me. I did not expect to come in with not warmer than average temperatures in our basin. This again is driven largely by the El Nino that you've been reading about in the text, the strong El Nino. This gets into the early part of our monsoon season, which is a good sign. I mean, not our monsoon season, our snow season. So let's hope that we get some good snow pack up there. That's exactly what we need to see if we were to have any kind of a release season at all next year. That kind of holds through January, February, and March, the first quarter of calendar 27. And you'll notice that the focus is on, particularly for precipitation in the above average in the lower part, but this is where it gets a little tricky because this is the thick part of our snow season. And most of the snow falls up here where it is in moderately above average to equal chance. Above average in the local area doesn't really mean all that much in terms of actual water in the reservoir. Again, our temperature is forecast to hold up about average. And then this is where I'm really going out on a limb, but I thought I'd throw it out there to finish out the year, April, May, June, which is the driest part of our year locally, meaning in the lower Rio Grande area. This is the driest part of the year. Equal chances of precipitation, but this is where it starts to get back to the above average temperature. So we're going to be entirely reliant on inflow. We would need, by the time we get to the end of the year, where we're sitting on 30,000 acre feet of combined storage, we're going to need a runoff of a couple 100,000 acre feet on the order of a couple 100,000 acre feet just to get into the operational range of combined storage. So it's a bleak year, and we've got some difficult planning ahead. We can certainly hope for a good monsoon season and snow season, but it is prudent to plan for the alternative, which is not a good monsoon or snowpack season. Looking at the seasonal drought outlook, you can see that this shape here kind of reflects that forecast for the June, July, August, September, July, August, September. Follows the July, August, September precipitation forecast, that they're looking at improvement, but remaining in drought. So a little bit of relief probably on the way. We'll see if it's enough to dig us out of this deep hole we've got in our reservoirs. El Nino is in place. So we've gone from anticipation to we are now in an El Nino advisory. And you can see last month we were sitting up here. Those temperatures have persisted and intensified. So we are in an El Nino, and it's expected, as you have no doubt seen in the press, It's anticipated to be a strong one. This update is pretty current, July 6th. So in summary, that, by the way, is October 7th, 2018, which is right about the time Elephant Butte bottomed out in 2018. That was a year. So we're done with our season. We've got Mexico shutting down on the 21st, Caballo on or about the 31st, and we will get you numbers. I'll circulate them through the Water Resources Committee when we get them, and we'll do two things. We'll do June charges and then final charges for EBID, which will run into the first couple of days of July. As I say, reservoir storage is going to be in a condition we haven't seen in since the 50s, and it never happened before the 50s. So we are looking at all-time low reservoir storage conditions. You can hope on that monsoon. You can pray on that monsoon and the upcoming snow season. Please do so, because we're very much going to need it. And with that, I would take any questions.
Questions for Dr. King? Director Donovan.
Mr. President, I just wanted to loop back. I did a quick search. In 2013, the water was New Mexico's credit. In fact, the quantity of which was a significant dispute between New Mexico and Reclamation. But it is an excellent example of lake levels at Elephant Butte Reservoir are maintained by the amount of credit water that New Mexico has in the reservoir. Without that, there is no pool of water that isn't released every year due to downstream contracts.
Yeah, and to put a little more context on 2013, it was a terrible inflow year, but it also followed 2011 and 2012. If you recall, 2011 was a year where EP1 had a whole lot of storage and we got very little inflow. So we ran 4 inches and shut down, and they kept running. We didn't have that end of the season contingency for release accounting. In fact, 2011 is why we have it. But as we got to the end of the year, there wasn't enough water to make. We're running out of water to make EP1's final diversions. So that's when Reclamation evaporated credit water during the year, which led to the lawsuit filed by New Mexico on the operating agreement against EBID, EP1, and Reclamation, which led to Texas filing Texas v. New Mexico. Then in 2012, that year was disrupted by the early release to Mexico, and it was also a terrible water year. We really struggled to recover from the disruption of that early release. And then we have 2013, which is the all-time worst year. So that was quite a sequence.
I wasn't going to quite give that amount of detail, Mr. President. There's a little bit of dispute about the
About what?
the quantity of water that had to be left in Elephant Butte at the end of the season.
Right.
There was a slight dispute about it.
Yep. Anything
Okay.
else?
Any further questions? Mr. Narvaez, thank you, Dr. King. Mr. Narvaez, do you have a report for us?
Yes, good morning. Sure do. Let me go and share my screen with you. Everybody see that screen?
Yes.
Okay. If you need to blow it up, we can blow it up a little bit more. So this is just kind of like Dr. King said, we're still working through the numbers. I do have some pretty good estimates as far as what EBID did for the season, but I'll go over that here in a few. Right now we have, at least within our system, outside of the river, there's 160 CFS that's going into the west side. And approximately, we're irrigating some 6 CT acres. approximately 90 acres on order right now. So we're using some of that water on the La Union west side. The rest of it's going to Texas, but that's how much water we do have within the EBID facilities there, 160 CFS. That's current. And right now, or I guess this is a little history of the season for the water that was, or acres that were on demand. When we opened up, you can see how it kind of creeped up. And once we saw some water in the system, we actually got to a peak in the early on, about 20,000 acres. And that was on the June 4th. And then as we progressed with the season, kind of demand went down. Got our second wave here. This high peak here is the last order day is what we're calling that. We went up to about 22,384 acres on demand. And then of course each day as the order stopped, you can kind of see as we dwindled down to the end of the season until eventually we didn't have any more acres on demand. But this is the little roller coaster there of the acres on demand for the irrigation season. Again, this is a recap on the flat rate weekend. We estimated we have about 2,800 acres of those flat raters, delivered approximately 1,400 acre feet. Ditch breaks, we still only had one. That's pretty good. We had a couple runovers here and there, but nothing that rose to the level of a ditch break, I guess you could say. But we did have one that was official, what we call official ditch break, which occurred early on in the season. We didn't have any more ditch breaks after that. So kudos to the maintenance team and the amount of water we did have in there. You know, we lucked out there on not having any spill or breaks and those kind of things, which was pretty good. So, and then just to give you a quick estimated summary of the season, these numbers are going to start to get refined as I go through all the numbers here and the closing. We still have some things that we got to close out as far as some lingering charges and people moving water around and those kind of things. So that'll improve this a little bit. But just a quick summary of what we did for deliveries for the array. We delivered about 1,000 irrigations, or these are orders, as you can call them. Approximately 18,000 acres. This is a cumulative amount of acres. Some of these acres are skewed just because towards the end of the season, there was a lot of acres on order, but not a lot of water in the accounts to deliver. So we'll work on trying to improve this number here a little bit. It's just within the way the system works. But in general, you can kind of see the cumulative amount of acres that were watered for the northern area, which is the array. Delivery, this is what was charged to the farmer. This is still, again, an estimate, 6,368 acre feet. We diverted 13,853 actual diversion into the heading. And the preliminary efficiency, if you want to call it, this is just the delivery compared to the diversion, about 46%. And when we made our allocation going back, I believe, Dr. King, we used 45 as our number. It looks like we hit that number based off of what we were thinking, what we might need to do. So overall, it became 45. The summary again for the Leesburg is 1,400 acres, 1,400 deliveries to about 17,000 acres. Delivery to the farmers, 5,700 acre feet. Diversion in the heading, 16,000 acre feet. On the east side, we had about 415 deliveries, delivering to 10,000 acres. Delivery to the farmer, almost 4,500 acre feet. Diversion at the heading, 9,737. And on the west side, we had about 734 deliveries. And then to the 16,000, almost 17,000 acres charged to the farmer, which is about 7,000 acre feet. Overall diversion to New Mexico, part of it, about 13,170 acre feet. So the overall numbers show you here. So EBID, for EBID deliveries only, we diverted 52,810. Delivery to the farmer, 23,706 to about 62,000 acres. Overall, about 3,500 irrigations. And we're just kind of looking at this number, about 45% delivery efficiency from diversion to actual on-farm charge. That's kind of what it looks like there. Now, again, this is New Mexico diversion. Overall, though, what we've actually put into the headings, if you can see these numbers here, we diverted in the headings about 65,000. But after you subtract Texas, which you can see I don't have all their numbers in there yet because they're just starting to send those out. That's where my number ends up being around 52,000 after I actually put their numbers in here. Closer to 52,000 for EBID. So that's basically the breakdown for the season. Of course, we're going to tighten up these numbers as we move along and we get everybody's information, and we'll get closer to what we actually did for the season. Hopefully by the next board meeting, but we'll have to wait till we get numbers back again, because at the end of the season we got to wait for everybody to finish off their charges and stuff. But it's a pretty good, real close to what we did as a district for EBID. Outside of that, I don't have any other thing to add unless there's any questions. I'll stand for some.
Any questions for Mr. Narvaez?
Mr. President, just one comment I make is I have a client who has some property near an area where a gopher hole was hit. He could not have been more complimentary of how the EID personnel handled it. He was meeting with me on something else and just mentioned that they were great to work with. So, credit to Mr. Narvaez, the whole people were great with.
I appreciate it. I'll be sure to pass it on to the guys. I mean, they did as much stress as they were under to get this water out, and knowing what we're dealing with, they did a spectacular job as far as I'm concerned there. Of course, we have things here and there. There's no doubt about it. We're not perfect, but I appreciate that. I'll definitely pass that on.
And Mr. Chairman, I would also compliment staff in general and James in particular on the way this year ran. In a year like this, we could, EP1 and EBID could absolutely be at each other's throats over, trying to divide up this piddly little bit of water that we've got this year. But throughout the month, as we got on our morning operations call, almost every time Enrique down from EP1 and James had already sorted out exactly what they were going to do. And, we would support it, refine it with with modeling runs and so on and so forth. But it ran more like a symphony than a car that was missing two cylinders. So compliments to James and his crew and to the staff in general.
Appreciate that. I thought you were going to say more like that than compared to James Rock show on July 4th at the stadium.
Yeah, missed that one.
Thank you, Dr. King. I'm done. And Mr. President, I just want to give, the end of season report from my area. Again, we had outstanding fill for our orders at our enterprise. We were on very shortly after diversions reached us. We were taking the last triples out of the canal. Like every part of it that needed to work with us at EBID was excellent. We move a lot of water around in order to be as aggressive as possible with surface water. The Water Records Department did a fantastic job about getting water moved, letting us know which accounts were still delinquent, and so therefore needed to be paid up before we could move the water. Helped us in coordinating all of that. And then at the ditch rider level, both coordinating, getting us water in time that we didn't have to pump anything out, as well as operational flexibility to come on and off. Both EBID needed us to, and has met our watering requirement. In talking with other farmers in my area, similar feedback that order fills were really good, that they were able to keep taking water beyond what they expected to be able to because the system was working so well. The only folks I talked to that said they had difficulty getting water also didn't place an order. So it was a perceived difficulty in receiving water, and so they didn't bother ordering it because they didn't think they could get it. For anyone that actually placed an order,
I didn't hear anyone say that they were unable to receive water. Yeah, outstanding. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Any further comment? Thank you, Mr. Narvaez.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is general and administrative. Right.
All right. Same story, different day. Cash is good. We're receiving our reimbursements from all our coordinated grant efforts via interstate and federal. We anticipate spending a lot more money here in the near future. We anticipate a lot of awards being made to the district, and so we're just moving along. Vehicles are in great shape. Probably hold those for another 3 years. Just things are improving. Just the trajectory is good. Not a whole lot to say here. Cash will be good at the end of the year. We're not in any worry. Could it be better? Probably, but I think there's a lot of things that the district needs to do currently to kind of get ahead of some of the historical problems. And so as we kind of keep going on the trajectory and keep improving, and once we kind of reach this plateau, we'll actually see a decrease in our expenses. But yeah, everything's good. Cash is healthy. I did want to point out, we do have a footnote here that the book balance is an estimate as we're moving into our new financial system. And we don't have the bank recs because we're no longer using QuickBooks, but that should be taken care of at the next board meeting. Our interest rate is 3.65% approximately. Our assessments received to date are still at that 95% threshold. Keep in mind, this is a total calculation that includes the local improvement district funds. It's about 92% last I checked for, farm and flat raters outside of the local improvement district. But I did get all the calculations and our accounts receivable aging schedules, and I'll be doing a very thorough investigation on how we can proceed with collections. What do we have to do to turn over those, doubtful accounts into revenue for the district? We have about 900,000 of ISC funding that's awaiting reimbursement. We did get full reimbursement for our last tier of Weary grant proceeds. So we got a check for about 470,000 there. And then recently got a check for some of our ISC grant proceeds of about 95,000. And so, money's moving fast. We're able to get reimbursement very quickly. So our cash flow is healthy at the district, so.
Mr. President, Mr. President, thank you very much. Excellent report. You had a comment in there that I wanted to drill down on. It remains my opinion that the best place for cash is within our members' enterprises. When that cash moves from their enterprises to the district, I'm looking to put it to work. However, there's an amount of cash that we need to have on hand to be able to do that work. We can't do it with a constant zero cash balance. You said that our cash position was healthy, but could be healthier. What is it that you're looking to target as an amount of our members' cash that we need to be, that we need to have at the district at any time to do the
On hand,
functions of it?
cash on hand?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah, it varies, and I will be putting some projections together. It depends on kind of what our award flow looks like, and if they'll do cash advancements for a lot of these high dollar projects going forward in the future. It depends on what our reimbursement cycle looks like, payroll and everything. I would say a healthy amount of cash to have on hand in any given month is approximately 3 million. That is liquid and can be reimbursed quickly, but depending on those reimbursement things, you probably want to be somewhere in the ballpark of about 6 million. Now, some of this funding that we're anticipating receiving, we don't know what the reimbursement timelines look like. Is it something where we request reimbursement, and 2 weeks later, they cut us the check back. Is it 1 month? Is it after the 2 years of the program? Not entirely sure yet. I assume it'll be on the shorter timeframes. And then for projects that, the district is going to be doing now the irrigation season is over, we're gonna be pulling about $1 million worth of cash to do some of our cost match for that. And so for some of those larger projects, we wanna, have cash on hand. So in short, it could range anywhere from 5 to 10 million is very extremely healthy, but you really only need about 3 million if you're being very efficient.
Thank you very much. Well, you said, so we're currently at about 10. And
Correct.
so you stated that we were healthy, but could be healthier.
Yeah,
Is,
can I give some examples? Probably. So for instance, we are in our fleet program, correct? So that is 4 years. We pay about 330,000 for our trucks over those 4 years. Based on the mileage of the vehicles, I'm gonna hold those for an additional 2 years, meaning we won't have to pay for our lease expenditures. So that'll be 330,000 over 2 years that we're not expensing out of the district, for example, right? In addition to that, we have our external accounting services helping us with our integration into our new financial ERP software, helping us with our audit and various tasks. They will no longer be needed after our fiscal year 26 audit. So that'll be a savings for the district that we no longer need. So in terms of areas of improvement similar to that, there's money that needs to be spent to get things where they need to be, but that money doesn't need to be spent all the time. It's not a ongoing into perpetuity expenditure, if that makes sense.
no, it didn't.
Okay.
Here's the bottom line I'm trying to get at. We're gonna be looking at budgeting and voting on
Correct.
assessments soon.
Mm-hmm.
If the answer is we currently have 10 million, but we really should be at some other number, and you've got a reason why that, then I need to consider increasing assessments so that not only are we covering operations, that we're getting the proper amount of cash in hand to do
Correct.
the things to maximize the benefit to our members. If your answer is no, we really only need 3 million, I got $7 million in excess cash. I should be spending that prior to increasing assessments. And so I'm trying to figure out where I need to be landed.
Yeah.
Based on your comment that we're healthy, but could be healthy.
Yeah, it's a little more complex than that because there's so much that has to be done in the future. In terms of day-to-day operations, the 3 million is sufficient, right? Because you can move money, get reimbursed for it in terms of grants, right? On an annual basis, the district needs approximately $11 million worth of cash, assuming you receive no assessments. But when you look into ongoing deferred maintenance of the district, such as some of these dams that could cost 75 million, you're gonna need a lot of cash, right? And so, but you don't need that cash at the present value, right? You need to be accumulating cash and building that up so that you can forgo those projects. So starting hopefully next month or after that, I will be putting together forecasts for the district, long-standing forecasts that can account for a lot of these things. They're not going to be perfect, but it could give a clearer picture on where assessments need to be. And since I've started with the district, I've calculated the exact need of assessment increases, so to the cent. And so where do we need to be next year, given the budget and everything in terms of assessments? That doesn't take into account a lot of the, deferred maintenance of the district. But what we do with this capital is we leverage it. So I mentioned that $1 million that we will be spending on a project, we're getting 1.6 million. So we're getting 2.6 million total project expenditures. And being able to leverage our cash like that makes a difference. Now, that doesn't mean that there's always going to be external funding available for projects like that, right? I can't predict that. I wish I could. We have a good indication on that, but I don't know if that's answering your question or not. I can get you.
No, it's not, and that's sufficient. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Brent. Thank you, Director Dubby. Please continue, Mr. Franklin.
No, that's it for me.
Okay, further questions for Mr. Franklin? Thank you, Mr. Franklin.
And then to the budget committee, James, I know you chair that. When did we want to schedule our meeting? I know For me, it'd be best probably around like that first week of August. If we could push it then. I know we said towards the end of July, but there's a lot going on in July. So first week of August would be great. Okay. Perfect. All right.
What's the month we act on the budget?
The end of August.
So our August board meeting,
Oh, we approved it in September, right?
We approve it in September, but I have to submit it at the end of August. Yeah.
Very good. Next item on the agenda is the manager's update, Mr. Smith.
I too would like to commend our operations team, our maintenance team, Dr. King. Unfortunately, we've become very good at short water seasons. It's not something that we want to get any better at, but this season went exceptionally smooth. I had not a single call, not a single complaint. Like James said, we had one ditch break. We ran a lot of water. I think we delivered every order that we possibly could, and they deserve some commendation because they did a great job. I also want to commend our dam and drain maintenance crews. You're going to see a report of what they've been doing, but they have knocked out the Lucero Dam, have completed the Hammett Dam, and are moving on to the Rhodey Dam, which is starting work today. The work they're doing is exceptional, improving the safety of the valley, improving our infrastructure, and using the money and the partnership that we have with the ISC. Ryan's not here, but the work that they're doing is pretty exceptional as well. And Alex is going to give a report on what those guys have been up to. Water season was fast and furious. We get tired of saying that. Hopefully we don't have to say that next year because we have too much water, not because we don't have any. We successfully completed it. I had the opportunity to go ride with Albert Borunda, our metering specialist, and I metered with him the Leesburg and the Hainer cable and the bio cable. And, you know, in theory, I understand how all of our operations work, but it's also very nice to get out there and see how it actually operates. You flip the switch and close the gate and not flip. So I appreciate Albert taking the time to spend the day with me and show me what he does all day, every day. He puts a lot of miles in, does a great job for us, for EP1, for the Bureau, keeping track of all the water that we have flowing. So I want to commend him too. I gave 2 interviews, one with Martha Piskowski, she's a journalist, about the Texas versus New Mexico settlement. And I also gave an interview to KFOX that was on KFOX, all 10 seconds of it. If you haven't seen it, it's on the Facebook page. That was interesting. I managed to avoid the media for 1.5 years, and then it's just been relentless since 2 weeks ago. So, we're next week, I think it's on the calendar of events, but next week I'll be presenting at the groundwater conference in Albuquerque with Dr. King, John Longworth, and Michelle on the Texas versus New Mexico settlement. Spending a lot of time in mediation and working on those issues. And it's been nice to actually be here in the district for a change and a little more hands-on than traveling all over the country. It's been a good month, so that's all we've been.
Questions for Mr. Smith? Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next item on the agenda is calendar events, Mr. Smith.
As I said, the New Mexico Groundwater Conference is next week, the 14th and 15th. We'll be presenting on the afternoon of the 14th. I'll be driving up and back likely on the 14th. The NWRA Western Water Seminar is August 3rd through the 6th in Boise, Idaho. We do have that on the consent agenda for any board member or staff that would like to attend. The NMSU, a number of us attended an irrigation management training at NMSU in May, I think. They're having a second course for evapotranspiration in irrigation management. That will be August 5th and 6th. And we also have approval of that in the consent agenda for board members who would be interested in attending that. The first training was well done. It was very pertinent for people actually on farm irrigating. It was good to learn. I think the evapotranspiration for me would be interesting just because that's an issue that we deal with on a regular basis. And then the Lower Rio Grande Water Alliance meeting, I believe now has moved for the third time. Is currently scheduled for August 6th at 9 a.m. Those meetings will now be held here rather than at the city utility office. And then finally, the Coalition of Rio Grande Water Users Conference that Chris Pauley puts on will be September 16th through the 18th at the Santa Ana Pueblo. And we are approving that in the consent agenda as well. Now, I forgot to mention in my manager's update, I received an invitation yesterday from the Consulate General for Israel for a water delegation to Israel in November. We'll talk about that later. But that's all we have on the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next item on the agenda is HR and safety update. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Ms. Maciel is in a training and is not able to be with us, so I will give her a report. Our current total employee count is 82 employees. We have 2 job openings currently, one for an equipment operator in the north, and we're hiring for the purchasing office here. Jasmine, who was in the purchasing office, has moved over to work with Leah in the finance department. We also hired Dominique. If you all have not met her, she's up front. Marty retired on Thursday of last week, and Dominique is filling in the tax department and will be up front. Welcome here to come in the door. Please stop by and introduce yourselves to her. We will be I guess they've finished interviewing. They'll be hiring somebody for the purchasing position in the warehouse in very short order. And that's about it. Congratulations to Marty on her retirement. She is enjoying her retirement at this point.
Questions for Mr. Smith? Next item on the agenda is the engineering and maintenance update, Mr. Rubio.
Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Let me go ahead and sign in here to our ArcGIS website, and I will share that screen. All right. So this is the second quarter report that we submitted over to OSC-ISC for the dam and drain funding. This is what our crew has done so far. We have QR access in case you guys want to access on your phone and follow along. Joa, do you want to go over the appropriations? Skip through these here. So our total estimated cost if outsourced for the work done to date is estimated at about $9.5 million. We've been able to do everything in-house. That's on the drains. In dams, our estimated work cost would be about $4.78 million. We've removed 192 thousand cubic yards of sediment from these two dams that we've done so far. As far as the drains, 4.68 million broken down, total drain length, just under 86,000 linear feet, drains cleaned, reshaped, and sediment removed. Our first dam was kind of our kickoff for all the new equipment. This is where we tested everything, make sure everybody got familiar. Lucero Dam, 180,000 cubic yards removed. Total project hours, 2,223. And we have a video here to show before and after. This was the condition when we first got there, when we first started. Full of vegetation there in the pooling area, as well as the arroyo up above. Right behind the Lucero farm. And this is our work after. We have some vegetation that came back in, so we're gonna go back in and cut and spray it down. Try to get rid of it. Contrast a little high here, but that's the arroyo that comes into the dam, completely clear. All the vegetation was pushed up into the banks for reinforcement. The Hammett Dam is the most recent that we just finished last week. Estimated cost if outsourced, just under 300,000, 11,500 cubic yards removed. Here we have a photo shortly after they started. That's about between a 3 to 4 foot cut of sediment. That little lip right there. Here's a video during. And I'll share a video after the entire presentation showing what it looks like today. One of the main drivers on this dam was that a farmer was cutting out of the emergency spillway, which is located on this side of the dam. So we essentially had no channel in case the dam overtopped for the water to safely direct back into the drain. For one of our first drains that we started on, we did 25,000 linear feet. This is in the Rincon drain, and we stopped. It's currently on hold due to the projects that we have associated with that drain. The work total there was about 1.1 million, and we will continue that here once we begin Rincon lateral phase 1, 2, and 3. And this is the total path here of the drain clean. This is a before shot on the left and an after on the right. So a bit of reshaping, vegetation is cleared, and you can see the water flowing through there currently. Doing what it's supposed to do.
You might want to click in those, Alex, and show them, you know. That's a big distance of drain clean.
This toolbar.
Is that drain at the wetlands where we have the solar pumps?
Close by, yes, sir. So that's the Rincon. Another location that we had was the Leesburg drain and the Hill drain intersection. We had a wash-in and a pipe that was rusted out that we had to replace. We went in there, replaced both pipes, recompacted, got everything back to the way it's supposed to be. Estimated cost, if outsourced, was about 80,000. This is 90 linear feet of culvert that was placed. 209 total equipment hours. And that's the corrugated pipe that went into the drain. and the way it was left. This was after.
You know how old the original lateral crossing was? Is that a drain or a lateral that's crossing over that?
It's
Not-
two
not
drains that,
pipe.
oh, I'm sorry, back here.
Yeah, the corrugated pipe that you removed, what was that?
That's where the two drains crossed over each other
Okay,
via the corrugated metal pipe.
and do you know the age of that corrugated metal pipe?
That was installed back in fifties, I believe.
Okay,
So it was about time. It was due for sure. The park drain is still ongoing. So far, we have 12,200 linear feet. Estimated cost if outsourced, 550,000. Just about 200 equipment hours as of now. This is what it's looking like now. Here's a before, just heavily vegetated, banks were almost non-existent, fences were encroaching. We got in there, this is the total length as of yet, and completely cleared it out, reestablished the banks, all the sediment that we pull out of the drains at the invert, we rebuild the banks. So if there's low spots, any sort of reshaping that we have to do on the banks to make them accessible, we go ahead and reshape them while we're there. West Drain is another large project that we have going on, 2 million, 2 million estimated if outsourced. Just about 47,000 linear feet. As of yet, you can see the amount of sediment that we've been having to remove there. Just to get it back to design invert. This is our total length of work done so far. And this is how it's looking. You can see the difference there. This was as they were moving down the drain. So this is that sediment photo. You can see the complete difference just along this bank. We're also doing the hatch drain, about 95,000 estimated so far, 21,000 linear feet. There's our total distance. That's a before. And there's our after or in progress. So these guys are out there making a huge difference. This slide here is an interactive map. Let's see if it lets me, there we go. This report is going to be accessible through the website. We're going to publish it. That way anybody that's interested can feel free to jump on, follow the path, and it'll take you to this presentation. It's all interactive. This slide here in specific will give you all of our locations as to where our guys are cleaning and the amount that's been done so far. It's a handy tool to have. Next quarter outlooks, Hammett Dam, which is now completed, Rhodey Dam, which is starting today, Fillmore Dam, just here south of Las Cruces is also on the docket. We have a decent sized rill that we have to fill in anticipation of heavy rains. Hatch Drain Park and the West Drain are all scheduled to be completed here within the next quarter. Any questions on this report so far? Yes, sir.
What do you do with the sediment you remove behind the dams?
Behind the dams, they're being used to rebuild and resurface. By rebuild, I mean, it's being pushed back at the Lucero. The sediment that was removed was pulled back to that arroyo just north of the Lucero farm to reestablish the banks and just create a clean, channel to divert the water. At Hammett, it was built it was used to rebuild the emergency spillway. which was having material removed by random farmers there in the area.
They'll do that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any questions for Mr. Rubio? And that's the completed.
Yeah. This is the completed video of the Hammett Dam. This was flown yesterday.
What's that tower there in the middle?
That tower is the intake structure for the water. So let me go back here just for comparison. That structure is this structure here. Same exact structure. You can see this is already a 3-foot cut. So if I go back to the video here, you can see the amount of sediment that was removed.
Sorry, Mr. Rubio, I don't
Yep.
believe that's being shared.
Thank you. So all the sediment that's cut again was built up onto the emergency spillway. Instead of just a flat cut, just, a vertical cut, they taper it back out. So that distance there is about 400, 500 feet, and they taper it out to a 3-to-1 slope. That way, any water that comes in from the watershed ends up at the intake riser, which then shoots it out under the dam. And if I'll pause it just right here, this is that emergency spillway bank that was being removed. All this sediment went back to build this right here.
What part of the valleys they have the dam located in?
This is in Hatch.
It looks great.
Yeah, they're doing a great job. And they're fast. They're getting good at their equipment as well. Yes, sir.
See, these are our dams, right?
Correct.
So do we have to get approved from anybody about the way we do this work?
Yes, so we follow all the Dam Safety Bureau regulations. They are our dams, so we have to maintain them. We do yearly inspections with them. Based off of their recommendations, that's how we come up with our list of priorities here for these repairs and fixes.
Is that a state agency?
Yes, sir.
Are they hard to work with, easy to work with? Where the like?
They're easy to work with. Yeah, for the most part.
That's not the other.
No, sir.
No, Henry's not. We don't know about them, don't we?
Yes, sir. Any questions, any further questions on the videos or the report?
No question.
One more topic that I would like to share with everybody is, last month, the morning of the board meeting that we had here, I had an NMSU detective and police chief come into my office with they had reports of some explosions going off behind the Tortugas Dam, which was right just above NMSU golf course. We had a trespasser that was out there, found a small parcel of land that was not recorded properly. Found a way to pay back taxes. Once paid, moved his trailer onto our property. We went through all the proper steps and channels to get that property recorded properly within the court system, within the county, to show that it is EBID property. We had a condemnation letter from a judge from back in 1960 that wasn't recorded properly with the county, which showed that single small parcel owned by somebody else. So when the officer came in, somebody had reported explosions going off. So they made a move. They got a warrant, searched his trailer, and they found explosive material. They found pipes, they found fuses, they found chemicals. So they made a move to get him arrested, was arrested. Mr. Lutz was very helpful in the entire process. We attended his hearing. They held him with no bond. We then had another court date for eviction. Very successful. I haven't been out there this week, but everything should be cleared by now. So everything's good. A little bit of a scare there for us, but all is good. Happy to report.
So something you'd never deal with in the irrigation district is bombs, but we're gonna have the NMSU Police Department or Sheriff's Department PD
Bomb squad.
go through and clear the area because we did award a material crushing contract last month. We're gonna have a crusher move in there, and we'd really rather not find a bomb in our piles of concrete. So they're gonna take care of that for us. NMSU Police Department, they're happy to help. And yes, David was very helpful. David got to testify as a witness in
Provided some nice comic relief for, I think.
Yeah.
But I did want to say, Mr. President, if I may, Mr. Rubio had actually already started the process of working on evicting this individual. It just got ramped up to a real extreme level on the day of our board last month. I'd like to thank him and AJ for coming to court. There's Mr. Smith, his insight was very helpful, but you know, I believe everything's been moved at this point. We have a court order of eviction, so very unique situation.
Yeah.
And I looked at it last week and the other one remaining is pallet fence.
Still
Looks like
there?
they got all the rest of the trash and things out of there.
Okay.
Several years ago, EBID cleaned the west drain down to Palm Island down there. I found what appeared to be an authentic grenade that they had dug up. It was pretty corroded, but I still gave it lots of room. Like, where did that grenade come from? How did it drain? Maybe so much fishing.
Times, thank you.
Yeah.
For dealing with that issue.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubio.
Yes, sir.
Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any board member would like to consider individually? With that, what is the rule of the board? Move to approve. I have a move to approve the consent agenda by Director Glacial. Second by Director Durai. Discussion.
Mr. President, I just want to note that particularly with the contracts, the way they're agenda, I appreciate the level of detail on the agenda. I just want to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Donovan. I too appreciate how clear it is, looking at what you're working the contracts. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
You opposed, please say no. It is the opinion of the president, the consent agenda passes. Next item on the agenda is suspension and transfer period. Let me pull up my script. Call to order the board sitting to hear suspension and transfers. The board is on applications by landowners in the district to transfer water rights pertinent to lands within the district, which are not suitable for irrigation, capable of being properly irrigated to other lands within the district. These applications are filed under section 73-13-4 of the New Mexico statutes. This board will decide if, within their judgment, the other lands within the district may be profitably and advantageously irrigated. The applicants are identified as listed on Exhibit A. Applicants were required to publish notice in any newspaper published within Diana County of EBID taking action to consider a resolution allowing the transfer. The publication should have listed the time and place of this meeting, listed the action to be taken by this board, listed a description of the move to and move from lands, and listed the reason for the requested transfer. The staff have a copy of the notice of publication
Yes, sir, we do.
for all the required points in the publication.
Yes, sir.
What was the last publication date made prior to this hearing?
Yes, sir, it was.
We will now proceed with presentation by staff. After that, the board members can ask questions of the staff.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
We have 2 water transfers and we have voluntary suspensions. First one we have is 2026 WT 007. Central Park West, New York is transferring a combined total of 3.95 water-righted acres to Salapex 6U Farms. If approved, Central Park West, New York will no longer have water rights, and Salapex 6U Farms will have a new total of 167.07. The second one we have is 2026. Pardon me. 2026 WTS 008, Darren and Indira Kastner is transferring 0.92 water-righted acres to Leon Gluck and Rita Phipps. If approved, Mr. and Mrs. Kastner will no longer have water rights. Mr. Gluck and Mrs. Phipps will have a new total of 6.65 water-righted acres. We have 9 voluntary suspensions for a total of 11.41 water-righted acres to be suspended. Staff recommends approval on all.
Thank you, Ms. Cross.
Thank you.
Are there questions from the board of the staff? At this point in time, the board will take evidence and testimony from the applicants or their representatives, or any person or persons who are here to protest the applications. We will proceed with any presentation by the applicants. After that, the board members and EBID staff can ask questions of the applicants. Will the applicants or their representatives introduce themselves? Anyone online? Are there any protestants who wish to speak? If so, please identify yourselves for the record. Anybody online? Are there any other comments? The chair will now entertain a motion to have a resolution to approve or disapprove the applications.
Mr. President, we have 2 resolutions. I didn't miss approval on the first one.
No, okay. 2 resolutions, that's correct.
How do you want to handle it, Mr. President?
They're voluntary suspension.
Mr. President, I move approval of resolution 2026-SMT-007A.
I have a motion on the floor to approve resolution 2026-SMT-007A by Director Dobby.
Second.
Second by Director Clayshaw. Any discussion? That discussion is closed. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say no. The opinion of the president, the ayes have it, the resolution passes. What is the will of the board on the second resolution?
Move to approve.
I have a motion on the floor by Director Garai to approve resolution 2026 S and T 007B.
Second.
Second by Director Christ. Any discussion? That discussion is closed. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the president, the ayes have it and the resolution passes. I will ask that the resolutions be formalized as called for by section 73-13-5 of the New Mexico statutes. And that the secretary of the board immediately certify and file with the state engineer a true copy of the resolutions and actions of the board. If there are any protestants who disagree with the action of the board, you may appeal this decision directly to the district court as provided under section 73-13-4 of the New Mexico statutes. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn the board sitting to hear the applications.
Motion so made.
I have a motion on the floor by Director Glacial to adjourn the board sitting to hear suspension and transfer applications. Seconded by Director Dry. Any discussion? With that discussion is closed, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the president, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. The board sitting to hear suspension and transfers is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carlson. With that, we have reached the end of our open session agenda. Is there any more open session business? And with that, I will accept the motion to go into closed session to discuss agenda closed session items. Motion on the floor by Director Ludwig to go into closed session to discuss the agenda closed session items. Second by Director Sloan. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the president, the ayes have it, and we are in closed session. State. That I will accept a motion to come out of closed session.
Motion so made.
Second.
Motion on the floor by Director Garai, seconded by Director Glacial to come out of closed session. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the president, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. I will note for the record that only items discussed in closed session were agenda closed session items. Is there anything else for open session? I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion on the floor by Director Glacial, seconded by Director Ludwig to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Say no. In the opinion of the president, the ayes have it, and we are adjourned. It is 12:47 p.m.
Thank you all.
Everyone.